The wind howled like a beast unleashed. Snow slashed across the endless white plains, blinding and merciless. Beneath that furious sky, a lone figure stumbled forward, her tattered cloak whipping about her like broken wings. Evelyn's heart clutched two tiny, wailing infants to her breast, shielding their fragile bodies from the storm's wrath. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each exhale a plume of frost against the night. She could no longer feel her feet. The ground beneath her boots had long since ceased to exist in her mind, only cold, endless cold, biting deeper than bone. Behind her, the lights of the settlement faded into the blizzard's veil. The last sounds of the place she once called home were the curses, the jeers, the damning cries of those she'd grown up among. "Harlot! Shame upon us! You've brought ruin, girl!" Their voices echoed in her mind louder than the storm. Her knees buckled, but she did not fall. She could not. Evelyn forced herself forward, one agonizing step at a time. The twins, barely hours old, needed her. They were all she had left. Two tiny lives pressed against her heartbeat, their warmth fading as quickly as her own. Evelyn had not planned for this. How could she? She had been a dutiful daughter, a quiet soul, until that fateful autumn when a drifter came through, a man with eyes like dusk, promises like poetry, and the wild scent of freedom clinging to his coat. A night beneath the stars, a kiss stolen in the dark, and then nothing. He was gone with the dawn. And now, so was her honor. The settler's code was unyielding. A woman who bore a child out of wedlock was a stain on their fragile sense of order. Evelyn's shame was doubled by the birth of twins. Twins, they whispered, were unnatural, a sign of sin or sorcery. Even her own father had turned his back on her, his face carved in granite as he ordered her from their home. A gust nearly tore the infants from her grasp. She cried out, cradling them tighter, the sound lost in the roar of the wind. The storm was growing stronger, the snow deeper. The night stretched on, cold and cruel. Her vision blurred. The world became a swirl of white and shadow. Evelyn stumbled into a hollow where the wind eased for a moment. She fell to her knees, gasping, the twins' cries growing weaker. She pressed them to her lips, murmuring words that no longer made sense even to her. Prayers, promises, apologies. Her heart broke with each tiny shudder of their bodies. Somewhere, a wolf howled, its voice slicing through the storm's fury. Another answered, closer this time. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Fear clawed at her throat. She scanned the darkness but saw only swirling snow and the skeletal shapes of trees. She tried to rise, but her legs betrayed her. She was too weak, too cold. The twins whimpered softly, their strength fading. Evelyn gathered what little shelter she could, a fallen pine, its branches heavy with snow. She huddled beneath it, curling around her babies, willing her body to give them warmth she no longer possessed. She rocked them gently, humming a lullaby her mother had sung long ago, when life was simpler, when love had not betrayed her. Time lost meaning. The snow fell thicker. The wind's scream became a whisper in her ears. She felt herself slipping, darkness creeping at the edges of her mind. And then, movement. A figure, distant at first, then closer. Tall, cloaked in furs, face hidden by the night and falling snow. Evelyn's breath caught. A settler? A bandit? Or worse? She tried to call out, but her voice was gone, stolen by the storm. The figure paused, watching. The snow seemed to part around him, as if the land itself feared his passing. He moved with purpose, silent and sure. As he drew near, Evelyn saw him more clearly, a man of the wilderness, his skin bronzed beneath paint and shadow, his dark eyes sharp and unafraid. A Comanche warrior, the kind settlers spoke of in fear and hatred, the kind Evelyn had been taught to dread. But in that moment she felt no terror. Only a faint flicker of hope, fragile as the flame of a dying candle. The warrior knelt beside her, his gaze sweeping over her and the twins. For a long heartbeat, he said nothing, did nothing. The storm raged around them, but in that space between breaths, all was still. Evelyn met his eyes, too weak to plead, too broken to resist. He reached into his cloak, drew it from his shoulders, and wrapped it around her and the infants. The warmth of it was immediate, shocking. She felt the heavy weight of the furs, smelled the smoke and leather, the wild earth. He lifted her gently, cradling her and the twins as if they weighed nothing at all. His strength was effortless, his movements careful. Evelyn wanted to speak, to ask why, to thank him, but the words would not come. The storm swallowed everything. She felt herself slipping again, this time into a deeper sleep, the kind that might not end. But before darkness claimed her, she heard the faintest sound, his voice, low and steady, speaking words she did not understand, words that felt like a promise. Through the blur of falling snow, the warrior carried her away from the hollow, away from the settlement that had cast her out, away from the storm's wrath. The world narrowed to the steady rhythm of his stride, the warmth of his cloak, and the soft breaths of her children, sheltered against her heart. The storm howled on, but Evelyn no longer heard it. She drifted into the dark, cradled by the arms of a stranger. The last thing she saw before sleep took her was the sky breaking, just for a moment, the clouds parting to reveal a sliver of moon, cold and watchful, over the endless white. The cave's entrance was nearly invisible beneath a thick veil of icicles and drifts of snow, its mouth hidden from the fury of the storm. The Comanche warrior moved through the whiteness with the certainty of one who belonged to the wilderness, his feet finding purchase where none seemed possible, his burden cradled against his chest. Evelyn barely felt the motion of being carried, her senses dulled by cold and exhaustion. The warmth of the warrior's cloak, heavy and smelling of smoke and earth, was the only thing anchoring her to the world of the living. Inside the shelter of stone and shadow, the wind's howl faded to a distant moan. The man lowered her carefully onto a bed of dry pine needles that lined a hollow near the fire he had tended earlier that day. Embers glowed faintly, and with practiced hands he fed them slivers of wood until the cave flickered with life again. The heat reached out, slow and tentative, pushing back the edge of death's chill. The twins whimpered, their tiny faces pale and damp with cold sweat. Evelyn stirred at their cries, her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. The man moved with swift precision. He unfastened the bindings of his cloak, pulling it fully around mother and children, tucking it beneath them to trap the warmth. His face, illuminated by firelight, revealed deep lines etched by hardship and solitude. His dark eyes, watchful and unreadable, settled on the twins first, then on Evelyn. A muscle tightened along his jaw, as if some long-buried memory tugged at him. He reached for a pouch at his waist, drawing out a small bundle of dried herbs, which he crushed between his fingers and tossed onto the fire. A soothing, sharp scent filled the air, mingling with the cave's damp stone and pine. Evelyn's eyelids fluttered. She forced herself upright, swaying with weakness but driven by instinct. Her arms tightened around her babies, her eyes wild for an instant, confusion and fear battling with gratitude. The warrior raised a hand, palm out, a universal sign of peace. He did not approach, but crouched by the fire, tending it as though the act alone could explain his intentions. Her heartbeat slowed. She studied him now as fully as her failing strength allowed. His hair was bound with leather at the nape, long strands falling loose around his shoulders. His face bore faint scars beneath the paint, white lines that spoke of battles survived. Across his chest, beneath the layers of fur and hide, a necklace of beads and carved bone glinted faintly, tokens of meaning she could not guess. The air between them filled with unspoken questions. The twins stirred, their small cries rising, weak but persistent. Evelyn shushed them softly, rocking them as best she could, her voice cracked from cold and fear. The warrior watched, silent, his brow furrowed not with anger, but with a quiet gravity. He rose, moving to the back of the cave where supplies were neatly stacked, evidence of foresight, of a man who lived by the rhythm of the land. From a wrapped bundle he drew a skin of water and returned to kneel at a respectful distance, offering it with both hands. Her fingers trembled as she took it, her gaze never leaving his. The water tasted of leather and earth, but it slid down her throat like salvation. The twins calmed slightly at her renewed warmth. She managed a single word, hoarse and tentative. Why? He understood, or perhaps he didn't. His head tilted as if considering how to answer, but no words came. Instead, he pointed to the storm's mouth beyond the cave's shelter, then at the infants, then at her. His meaning was clear enough. Alone, she would have died. The fire snapped, sending shadows leaping along the cave walls. Evelyn shivered and drew the cloak tighter. She felt the heat working its way back into her bones, but along with it came memory, the bitterness of rejection, the sting of betrayal, the faces turned away as she begged for mercy. She felt the weight of her shame pressing down, heavier now in this strange man's company. But he did not look at her with judgment, nor with pity. Only with a warrior's steady regard, as if she were something fragile yet fierce, worthy of protection if not understanding. Outside, the storm raged on, but within the cave the world grew smaller, quieter. The man sat back against the stone wall, his eyes fixed on the fire. Evelyn dared a glance at him, tracing his features in the flickering light. There was something in his stillness that soothed her, though she could not name it. She felt a thread of trust begin to weave itself between them, fragile as spider's silk but real. The night deepened. The twins slept at last, their breathing soft and even. Evelyn drifted between waking and sleep, the exhaustion too great to fight. But her senses remained tuned to every sound, the crackle of fire, the sigh of wind through narrow gaps, the faint breath of the man who had saved them. In that liminal space, fear ebbed, replaced by wonder. Who was this stranger who owed her nothing, yet risked his safety to shelter her? Some time before dawn, a low growl broke the quiet. The warrior's eyes snapped open. Evelyn froze, every nerve alight. The sound came again, closer this time. The unmistakable snarl of a wolf, hungry and bold enough to follow human scent into the storm. Another voice joined it, then a third. Shadows moved beyond the cave's threshold, shapes that circled and crept. The man rose in one fluid motion, bow in hand, quiver at his back, knife at his hip. Evelyn clutched her twins, heart hammering, eyes wide as she watched him move, silent as the falling snow, deadly as the winter night. He positioned himself near the entrance, shoulders squared, waiting. The first wolf lunged from the dark, eyes burning with hunger. An arrow flew, swift and sure, striking the beast's chest. It fell with a yelp that echoed through the canyon beyond. The second wolf came from the side, jaws open wide. The man spun, knife flashing in the firelight, and steel met flesh. The wolf fell back, wounded, retreating into the storm. A third shape hesitated at the cave's edge, wary now. The warrior stood tall, breath visible in the cold, daring the creature to cross the line between night and flame. It did not. With a final growl, it vanished into the blizzard, taking its wounded companion with it. Silence returned, broken only by the crackling fire and Evelyn's rapid breathing. The man stood motionless for a long moment, listening, before lowering his weapons. He glanced back at her, and for the first time, a flicker of something softer crossed his face. Concern, perhaps, or relief. Evelyn's fear gave way to awe. She had seen men fight before, wild, frenzied, desperate, but never like this. His movements had been measured, precise, as if the battle were a dance he had long since mastered. She met his gaze and offered the only thing she had, a small, trembling nod of thanks. The warrior returned to the fire, wiping his blade clean with a scrap of hide. He sat, bow resting across his knees, eyes once more on the flames. Outside, the wind began to ease, the storm's fury spent at last. Dawn's pale promise touched the horizon, its light faint and cold. Evelyn held her children close, listening to their soft breaths, watching the man who had become their protector in this bleak and frozen world. She did not know what the day would bring, but for the first time since the nightmare began, she felt the faintest glimmer of hope. The cave was still, but beneath its quiet surface, something had shifted. The bond between outcast and warrior had been forged in fire and frost, in the blood of wolves and the silence of shared understanding. The storm had not claimed them. Together they would face whatever came next. And beyond the cave, the wilderness waited. Morning broke cold and pale, the storm's wrath leaving the world draped in an ocean of unbroken white. The cave's mouth framed that stark silence, a reminder that the world beyond remained as dangerous as it was beautiful. Evelyn's heart stirred from uneasy sleep. The twins nestled against her, their tiny bodies warm beneath the Comanche warrior's cloak. Her limbs ached from the cold, and though the fire still glowed faintly, she knew they could not stay hidden in that hollow of stone forever. The man stood at the cave's edge, his silhouette carved against the dawn. He surveyed the world with the caution of one who had survived it too long to trust its quiet. His bow rested across his back, and at his feet lay the body of the wolf he had slain in the night. With care, he crouched, removing its pelt with swift, practiced strokes. Every motion served a purpose, nothing wasted, nothing left to chance. Evelyn watched him work, her heart heavy with questions she dared not ask. What future awaited them now? How far could she go, burdened by weakness and the weight of two newborns? And yet, in the presence of this silent protector, she felt stronger, as if his resilience lent her some measure of his strength. When he was done, the warrior rose and turned toward her. He held out a strip of the wolf's hide, offering it as a band for her boots, knowing the snow would devour what little warmth she had left. She accepted with trembling hands, murmuring thanks, though she doubted he understood her words. And yet, she felt sure he understood her meaning. Their bond, forged in the storm, did not need language. He gestured toward the east, where the sun crept over the frozen horizon, and then to the distance beyond the trees. A path. A destination. Perhaps his village, or perhaps only safety far from the place that had cast her out. Evelyn hesitated, glancing down at the twins. Could they survive such a journey? Could she? But the choice was no longer hers. To stay was death. To move was to gamble with what little hope remained. They set out together, leaving the shelter of the cave, stepping into a world that glared with winter's indifference. The snow lay deep, and each step was labor, but the warrior broke trail ahead of her, his strong frame cutting a path through the drifts. He carried the wolf pelt across his shoulders, and now and then he paused to help her over some hidden hazard, a fallen branch, a tangle of ice-sheathed roots. His eyes remained ever watchful, scanning the woods for threats no less dangerous than the storm they'd escaped. Evelyn moved as best she could, cradling the twins close, their soft breaths the only warmth that truly reached her heart. Every muscle burned with the effort, but she refused to falter. For their sake, she would walk until she could no longer stand. The bitter wind clawed at her face, and her lips cracked and bled, but she pressed on, following the stranger whose strength had become her lifeline. Hours passed. The land unfolded before them, endless trees, their branches heavy with ice, the world hushed but for the crunch of their footsteps. Now and then, animal tracks marked the snow, deer, fox, rabbit, but no sign of man. That loneliness pressed upon Evelyn, reminding her of how far she had fallen from the world she had once known. And yet, was she not safer here, among these frozen woods, than she had ever been among those who had called themselves her kin? The sun climbed, casting long shadows. Hunger gnawed at her, but she said nothing. The warrior seemed to sense it nonetheless. Near a frozen creek, he halted, holding up a hand to signal her to wait. With swift, silent steps, he moved through the trees, disappearing from sight. Evelyn sank to her knees, exhaustion washing over her in waves. The twins whimpered, restless. She whispered soft comforts, rocking them gently, though her arms trembled with weariness. Minutes dragged like hours before the warrior returned. He carried 2 snowshoe hares, their white fur blending so perfectly with the snow that she marveled he had seen them at all. With swift efficiency, he built a small fire, shielding the flame with stones, and prepared the catch. The smell of cooking meat filled the air, and Evelyn's stomach ached with longing. He offered the first share to her, always to her, and she ate with tears stinging her eyes, not from the taste, but from the kindness she had not expected, not deserved. They ate in silence, sharing the small meal. The warrior saved a portion, wrapping it for later, before stamping out the fire and smoothing the snow to hide their passage. Evelyn watched his care and understood the wisdom of it. The wilderness might hide them, but only if they hid themselves well. Their journey resumed, the land rising in low hills, the snow deeper still. Clouds gathered once more on the horizon, heavy with new storms. Evelyn felt her strength waning, each step harder than the last. Her legs shook, her breath came in gasps. The twins, though quiet now, felt heavier with every mile. She stumbled, falling hard to her knees, snow burning against her skin like fire. The warrior was at her side in an instant, lifting her gently, his brow furrowed not in anger, but concern. She wanted to speak, to tell him she could go on, but the words would not come. Without hesitation, he shifted the burden, lifting the twins into his arms, wrapping them in the wolf pelt against his chest. He nodded to her, as if to say, "Lean on me." She did, her pride forgotten, her only thought for the lives in his care. Together they moved forward, slower now, but steady. The wind rose again as the afternoon waned, the sky darkening with the promise of fresh snow. The trees thinned, opening onto a frozen lake that stretched like a sheet of glass, untouched by man or beast. The warrior paused at its edge, studying the land beyond, his face unreadable. Evelyn followed his gaze and saw what he saw, smoke in the distance, thin and pale, rising between two hills. A settlement, a camp, hope. But hope was a dangerous thing. She felt it stir in her chest and feared it as much as she yearned for it. Whose fire burned there? Friend or foe? The warrior's posture stiffened. He smelled danger on the wind, or perhaps only caution. He turned to her, eyes dark and questioning. Should they risk it? Or turn aside into the deeper wilderness? Evelyn met his gaze and found strength there. She thought of the twins, of the night they had survived, of the journey they had endured. She thought of the man who had given her shelter without asking for anything in return, who now carried her children as if they were his own. She nodded, trusting his judgment, willing to follow wherever he would lead. The decision made, the warrior adjusted his grip on the twins and guided her along the lake's edge, keeping to the shadows of the trees, moving with care. The smoke drew nearer, the hills rising like silent sentinels. The wind carried the faintest sound, a dog's bark, the clatter of tools, the murmur of voices. Civilization, but what kind? Dusk bled into night as they approached. The first flakes of new snow began to fall, soft and slow, masking their trail once more. The warrior halted at the crest of a hill, the camp below them lit by the glow of firelight and lanterns. Figures moved between tents and wagons, their shapes indistinct in the growing dark. Evelyn's heart raced. She felt the weight of choice pressing upon them. Go forward and risk all, or turn back into the wilderness where only cold and hunger waited. She looked to the warrior, waiting for his sign, trusting him as she had never trusted another. He watched the camp in silence, his body still as stone, the falling snow gathering on his hair and shoulders. And then, with a breath she barely heard, he made his choice. He stepped forward, leading her down the slope toward whatever awaited them in the valley's heart, toward firelight and uncertainty, toward the next chapter of their hard journey. The valley's heart welcomed them with flickering firelight, but no warmth. Evelyn's heart felt it the moment they drew near, the unease beneath the glow of lanterns and the crackle of campfires. This was no haven, no village of kind souls ready to shelter a lost woman and her twins. The shapes that emerged from the shadows were hard-eyed men, faces lined with hunger, suspicion, and the cold bitterness of the frontier. Bandits, perhaps deserters, men who had no home but what they could take by force. The Comanche warrior sensed it too. His stride slowed, shoulders tightening like a drawn bowstring. His hand fell to the hilt of his knife, but he made no move to draw it. Not yet. The weight of the twins against his chest reminded him what was at stake. Evelyn's breath quickened, her heart thundering in her ears as they crossed into the circle of light. The men watched in silence, their glances sharp and measuring, the way wolves might eye wounded prey. One of them stepped forward, a broad man with a crooked nose and a scar that split his brow. His voice was rough, the accent of a drifter who'd spent too long chasing fortune down dead trails. "Well, what's this? A woman and a redskin. With babes, no less. That's a sight." Evelyn clutched at the warrior's arm, but he did not flinch. He met the man's gaze with that steady, unbroken calm that had carried them through the storm. The scarred man smirked, mistaking that silence for submission. He waved a hand toward the fires. "You look half froze. Come, warm yourselves. Share what you've got. It's only neighborly." But there was nothing neighborly in his tone, nothing kind in the way the other men edged closer, circling like carrion birds. Evelyn's throat tightened. She could smell the danger in the air, thick as smoke. The Comanche warrior knew it too. His eyes flicked to the tree line, measuring distance, judging whether flight was still possible. The scarred man's smile faded. His patience was thin, his intent now clear. "Maybe you didn't hear me," I said. The warrior moved before the sentence ended. A blur of motion, silent as the falling snow. His knife flashed in the firelight, and the scarred man staggered back, blood welling from a gash across his hand where he'd reached for the twins. Chaos erupted. Men shouted, lunging forward. Evelyn screamed, falling to shield the babies with her body. Steel met steel. The warrior drew his second blade, turning aside a club swing, driving the point of his knife into the attacker's side. A gun fired, deafening in the night, the shot going wide as the shooter fell beneath the warrior's furious strike. Snow churned beneath them, stained dark where blood spilled. The camp's fragile order shattered, men scattering, some to fight, others to flee the storm the warrior had unleashed. Evelyn crawled toward the twins where they had fallen, heart in her throat, hands numb with cold and terror. She gathered them close, rocking them as the battle raged around her. A man loomed above her, his shadow vast against the fire's glow. But before his hand could close on her, the Comanche was there, driving him back with a fury born of desperation and purpose. The fight was swift, brutal, the snow swallowing the sounds of dying men. At last, the warrior stood alone, chest heaving, face splattered with blood not his own. The surviving bandits fled into the night, their courage spent. The camp was silent but for the crackle of flames and Evelyn's soft sobs as she cradled her children. The warrior knelt beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. His dark eyes met hers, and in them she saw not victory, but sorrow. He had not wanted this fight, but he would not let her fall prey to such men. Not while breath remained in his body. They stayed only long enough to gather what they needed, a blanket, a sack of dried meat, a flask of water. Then they fled the camp, leaving its broken ruin behind. The snow fell heavier now, the storm closing in once more, as if the land itself sought to bury what had transpired. For hours they pressed on, through woods that seemed endless, across frozen streams and over rocky ridges. Evelyn's strength was nearly gone, but the warrior bore the twins without faltering, his will unbroken. At last, as dawn bled into the storm's gray shroud, they came upon a hollow where the land rose high on three sides, sheltering them from the worst of the wind. There, the warrior built a fire, small and hidden, but enough to drive back the cold. Evelyn fed the twins from what little she could provide, her body weary, spirit frayed. She watched him work, marveled at his tireless care, the quiet way he gave all he had without expectation. In the flickering light she saw the lines of his face, the scar at his temple, the strength in his hands. And for the first time she let herself hope, not for safety, but for something deeper. A future. A bond forged in more than survival. The day passed in uneasy peace. But as night fell again, so too did the weight of choice. The warrior sat apart, sharpening his blade, eyes distant. Evelyn crossed to him, the twins asleep at last, their soft breaths a comfort against the wild's howl. She knelt beside him, searching his face. "Tell me," she whispered, though she knew he could not. "What do we do now?" He met her gaze, and in that look she found her answer. Tomorrow they would part. His people, his purpose, both called him elsewhere. She could not ask him to stay, nor would he ask her to follow where she could not go. But tonight they were here. Together. Bound by all they had endured. Evelyn reached for his hand, and he let her take it, fingers rough with toil, warm despite the cold. In that quiet moment words were useless. What mattered was the promise unspoken, that they had saved one another, and would carry that bond however far they walked. Dawn broke pale and bitter. The storm had passed, leaving the world clean and cruel. The warrior rose first, packing what little they had. He pointed south, where the land flattened and forests gave way to the edge of settlement. A place where Evelyn might find shelter, a life beyond the reach of those who had cast her out. She nodded, tears freezing on her lashes, unable to speak. He turned then, without ceremony, without farewell. The Comanche way. To look back was to break the courage needed for parting. He walked north, into the wild that had shaped him, the land he called home. Evelyn watched until he was gone, swallowed by the trees. Then, with the twins held close, she turned south, toward whatever future awaited. Alone, but no longer lost. Stronger than she had been, because of the man who had saved her, and whom she had, in turn, saved. The final choice had been made, not of words, but of deeds. And as she walked, the snow fell softly around her, a blessing and a burden, covering the past even as it marked the path ahead.